Hello, my name is David Johnson. For those of you who don't know me, and my lecture is entitled ENFIL. The relations among the rooms and between each room and the whole reflect the demands of practical use, the allure of memorable character, and the delight of beauty and style. This quote from Alberti's treatise is intended to focus this lecture with respect to architecture as the art of building. More specifically, it frames the art of building as a strategic organization of pieces, what Alberti refers to as the relations among the rooms between each room and the whole. So to formulate this investigation, I will also begin with the pieces. As frightening as this image may be, it offers an ideal model by which we can explore the notion of pieces as containers. The rectangle we refer to as the desktop has been overcome by the graphical organization of these containers. There even exists a line of trimmed folders along the right-hand side of the screen, which suggests that the logic of this organization can be extrapolated infinitely. Of course, the organization of these containers is familiar, a rectangular Cartesian layout which renders each instance as particular and therefore separate from its counterparts. An infinite collection of detached, similar containers differentiated only by their contents and label. And how do we interact with this surface? With 2 clicks of the mouse, we enter into the collection of anticipated information adorning the blank digital surfaces of a folder. Here we see the fictional conclusion to Kuleshov's retrospective manifesto, employing the same gridded organization, this time an axonometric projection. The logic of the graphical depiction of the desktop folders mimics that of this example. In one container, Kuleshov places the paintings of Dali. In another container, Korb's master plan. In a third, he stages Liszewski's Tribune. Observing the reversal between externality and internality, we can substitute the word folder for the word plinth, the word label for street entrance. But what about the sea of dark gray upon which the collective tabula rasa floats? I would like to focus more on this field of transition, the connective tissue which ties these disparate parts together. To the metropolitan crowd, it is the streets, walkways, and crossings, both horizontal and vertical, the backstage from which Kuleshov's subject emerges through drawn curtains. On our desktop, it is the surface on which the mouse moves between clicks, the thin black line negotiated between frames. In Jacques Tati's Playtime, we observe a critique on the type of movement sponsored by an architecture which seals its contents discreetly in boxes. To shoot the film, Tati constructs a small modern city, the expense of which ultimately bankrupts him, ruining his career as a filmmaker. Tativille is a veritable modern Paris, the dream of Corbusier brought to life on the silver screen. As the characters stumble around the city in a comical fashion, often running into walls of glass, furniture, and one another, a critical argument is made for an investigation of the medium of travel between disparate parts of a system of hermetically sealed boxes. In fact, the way in which Tati's camera angles frequently subsume multiple interactions suggests a collection of frames situated within a larger frame about which the viewer's eye is encouraged to move. This sensation within the wide frame is enhanced by the non-specific mood of Tati's narrative. Transient movement is foregrounded within the collective precisely because nothing is featured in the plot. This image in particular is visually connected to both Kuleshov and our desktop layout, but it would be naive not to mention an important distinction with regard to scale. This situation operates at the scale of a human, somewhere in between the macro scale of the city of the captive globe and the paradoxically micro scale of the infinite computer desktop. Notice also the relative uniformity of the cubicles, despite the fact that they are inhabited by subtly nuanced individuals carrying out specific daily episodes. If the identical frame of the cubicles is inherited, then the production of difference and ultimately character is dependent on decorative objects or props. Expanding on the nature of the cubicles as a collection, they suggest an interior condition situated not with respect to an exterior, but within a larger interior. Tati's wide frame has materialized concretely. The cubicles exist not under their own roofs, but under a larger collective roof. Envelopes within an envelope, they are each a second-degree interior. By inverting Venturi's argument, we can discuss the cubicles as decorated frames within the shed, or within the duck. If you were to ask anyone for advice on furnishing your new apartment, no doubt it would be impossible to get through the conversation without some mention of a certain popular Swedish designer. IKEA provides a collection of props for the purpose of affecting the mood of the local narrative. The furniture, outside of its functional role, provides a backdrop against which domestic life unfolds, a decorative fragment of the mind of its owner. On the other side of IKEA's ascension is a world appropriately labeled the showroom. Within the showroom can be found endless possibilities, kern form multiplied by an industrially conjured variation of Kunstform. In order to properly present the collection as a series of possible constructed lifestyles, IKEA positions their items as a set of neighboring containers. By decorating a series of frames organized along a promenade, IKEA produces a human-sized rat maze in which subjects scurry from frame to frame, attempting to identify a formidable associate. IKEA has taken the compartmentalization of their decorated environments so far as to let them parade around outside the box. Here we see a portable realization of IKEA's cast of characters performing on an asphalt runway. This same disengaged conception invents the show belonging to IKEA's in-house ensemble. The showroom enables its occupants to drift seamlessly between multitudes of truncated environments. A yellow brick road which leads Dorothy and the gang through Jerry's apartment, Lucy's bedroom, and a familiar coffee shop before depositing them in the Emerald City warehouse. IKEA's parade of domestic situations evokes the showroom promenade as a model of movement between decorated frames within a larger frame. IKEA's frame has changed since its inception. The original IKEA showroom, which made its debut in Stockholm, was mimetic of an often referenced example in contemporary architectural discourse. For IKEA, Wright's spiraling pantheon became the perfect prototype in which to parade their curiosities. Instead of a series of frames adorned with art collections, a small translation produced a continuous fourth wall from which to observe a series of dioramas. In his analysis of Wright's Guggenheim, Preston Scott Cohen comments on the relationship of the spiral ramp to its radially organized appendages. He compares it to a cabinet of curiosities, as essentially an extremely tall picture gallery. The cabinet of curiosities inhabited a curious scale, larger than an object, smaller than a room. Similarly, the Guggenheim is caught in between. Larger than a room, it both invites people in for a private viewing and puts these people on display. It is this model, the cornucopic microcosm, that corresponds to the cabinet of curiosities. It is, given its exterior form, also an object of curiosity within the city. Cohen's diagram splits the enfilade of the French Hotel in half and then curls it in on itself to produce both the series of frames as well as the transition. He then appropriates this model through an inversion to produce his Tel Aviv Museum of Art. This operation forces the spiral ramp into a facade-like condition, the interior transition called to the exterior, an external locus of identity rather than an internal. The flexibility with which Cohen manipulates a classic model of transition is a useful operation. The manipulation of the French hotel enfilade into a non-axial arrangement suggests the editorial role of the architect in sequencing a series of frames. A surprising instance of a showroom model appears in London with the curation of his personal oddities by Sir John Soane. An apparently strange programmatic clash turns out to be a revealing contradiction through the manifestation of the showroom in a domestic context. The compartmentalization of the galleries within the larger framework of a house renders a big box of cabinets of curiosity in a literal sense. This is Soane's life on display. The plan and section reveal variously shaped cabinets linking Soane's curiosities through axial and non-axial enfilade, as well as pockets of backstage transition. In the constant refiguring of the decoration and architecture of Soane's experiment, we find the role of the architect as editor. The architecture of the classical interior has now become one of innumerable instances of configuration. The blocks are made of the raw material captured by the camera. In the absence of a live studio audience, the editor assembles the record of events. In the studio of the Palazzo Doria, the frames are interconnected by a recurring rectangular portal cutting from the center of one frame to the center of the next. This sequence preserves a regularity of the relationship between seeing and moving along an intelligible axis. In the neighboring studio, the axial sequence is multiplied by a set of crossings, suggesting the presence of concurrent serial narratives. At Hadrian's studio, the frames tell a story which is sequenced largely with respect to a central recurring scene. In some productions, the portal is consistently moved to the back of the scene, foregrounding a specific plot. In others, the motion of the actors between scenes relocates gradually from the back of the frame to the front. The raw footage of occurrence captured within each frame is the medium from which the editor works. One of the first models of the sitcom is present on the set of Desilu's I Love Lucy. This production requires a set of cameras to film simultaneously while the narrative on stage is recorded before a live studio audience. The separate reels are then cut and assembled to produce a continuous narrative to serve as the content of the episode. An actor on the set of I Love Lucy will remain in character for the duration of a scene which takes place in one room. Transition is accomplished through a fade to black between scenes, and in some instances, the literal closing of the curtain. The soft theatrics, which mediate between scenes of I Love Lucy, have the effect of a sunrise and sunset, which graciously blend the plot into a continuous narrative. Often, each successive scene unfolds from the seed which has been planted by the scene before. The plot unfolds as if the actors and the audience are relying on cue cards to prime their expectations. When the scene fades to black or the curtains close, the actors are preparing for the next scene. Similarly, in the cut and joined edition, the editor gives the viewer a preparatory transition. The Lucy transition is one way in which two scenes can be tied together. Its mechanism connects well with Rem's description of the downtown athletic club as a locker room the size of a skyscraper. Insofar as a locker room is a preparatory interlude, the downtown athletic club utilizes the same theatrics between frames to compress time and distance as Lucy's editor in fading the frame at a scene change. A sitcom which can be considered in opposition to Lucy is the comic narrative of the Seinfeld crew. Seinfeld is recorded in Desilu's multi-camera technique and cut with an exuberance which belongs to the narrative of a fast-paced Manhattan lifestyle. This accounts for Seinfeld's rapid delivery and multiplicity of short, interrelated scenes. The two original main stages of the show, decorated as an apartment and a restaurant, necessitate a transition which compresses time and distance while still leaving the imprint of zooming around New York City's streetscape. The backstage has to be exposed because the transition is from interior to interior. Seinfeld accomplishes this acceleration by overlaying the transition with a bass guitar solo, disjunctively warping the characters from one set to the next by way of street view of the destination building. The song, produced on top of laughter and successive punchlines, is an experience akin to the underground transit of the New York City subway. The bass guitar wormhole experience can also be found in Kuleshov's work. Unlike the tower of locker rooms at the downtown athletic club, which produce a preparatory transition, the forced perspectival corridors at Rem's Casa de Musica elicit the Seinfeld warp mechanism of compression. The rhythm of connection has become as much a part of the experience as the exuberantly encrusted rooms in which the primary scenes unfold. Seinfeld relies on the image of a building seen from the street to cue the observer that a location change is taking place within the city. At Casa de Musica, Rem uses the same technique of destination reference to indicate where a location change takes place. On the interior as well, Rem creates a portal which flattens the current frame onto the next via the transition. The homogeneity of the decoration of each of the frames combined with the difference in decoration between them produces this effect. In opposition to the dimmer switches used by Lucy's editor, we now have a punchy bass slap rhythm to kick us from one frame to the next at Seinfeld's Casa de Musica. Of course, both of these splicing techniques are variations on the theme of compressing the transition, but as you could infer, there are other ways to create transition without the compression of time and distance. Here we have a film series in which a lot of the scenes take place within a transitory frame. The use of Steadicam tracking technology in NBC's The West Wing turns the previously static fourth wall into a vertical panel hovering a few feet in front of the actors as they perform continuous walking scenes along a winding path. The effect on the viewer is a ghostly out-of-body experience. The camera produces an endoscopy of the set, resulting in a constant tunnel-like transition, focusing retrospectively on the actors. The editor's role in this model becomes one of picking up where you left off, producing a completely connected loop. This once again brings to mind the organization of Wright's Guggenheim Museum. A continuous transition, half of a French hotel enfilade through a series of cabinets of curiosity, not to mention the experience existing in the Guggenheim of watching yourself look at art, another instance of the out-of-body experience. We can also look to IKEA's Yellow Brick Road for the showcase promenade, which seems to be suggested by an occupied transition. An important distinction exists between IKEA's partitioned maze-like promenade and that of the Guggenheim. Like the set in the West Wing, IKEA accomplishes its serial exploration by impeding the line of sight, setting up a series of closed environments rather than one large room. The larger frame in which the disparate scenes exist is effectively removed in favor of a theater of sequential promenade. The films explored thus far have transitioned by compressive splicing and following the transition through a continuous loop. Hitchcock's Rear Window manages to avoid compression and maintain a static frame by placing all of its interior frames in one shot, a collection of interiors inside a larger interior. This collection of smaller frames inside a larger frame is reminiscent of Tati's technique, but unlike with Tati, the scenes are edited together as a continuous narrative with an editor capable of focusing the lens on one particular local narrative at any point in the sequence. The movie is not technically shot within one large frame, but the construction of the smaller concurrent narratives within the frame of the larger makes this possibility apparent. A time-lapse video of the entire movie within one panorama approximates this editorial technique. The film focuses on the setting of a courtyard between two buildings. One becomes the fourth wall of the apartment of protagonist L.B. Jeffries, and the other forms an active backdrop. The courtyard and its four walls become the microcosm of a stage. The narrative framed by Jeffries' apartment focuses on the courtyard against a quasi-two-dimensional plane of narratives framed by the windows of the opposing apartment building. From Jeffries' vantage point, each window frame becomes part of an intricate plot. He provides the actors with nicknames and assembles pieces of a larger narrative by focusing his camera lens. The transition of the actors between windows exists by inference behind the brick facade. The simultaneous local narratives of Hitchcock's Rear Window can be compared to the configuration which exists at Koolhaas's McCormick Center. McCormick Center contains a network of linking passages which negotiate between its nuanced frames. At McCormick Center, Hitchcock's window frames have become the outlines which describe scenes such as the radio station, sitting areas, and courtyards. Notice also the blurry people. The camera capturing these images had a slow enough shutter speed to render the people in transition as blurry, while the people in the static frames remain clear. The exploitation of velocity juxtaposed with stasis is taken to such an extreme that even the train which glides over McCormick's rooftop participates in the shuffle. The experience of the large frame has become a rear window in plan. The static narrative at McCormick exists within various frames amidst constant motion. The focus of the narrative at McCormick is never on one particular frame, but floats voyeuristically like Jeffries' lens, connecting multiple disparate scenes, the cohesion of which is left to the observer's imagination. To illustrate this point further, we can also look to the auditorium of our previously referenced Casa de Musica. The frames composed along the walls which bracket the auditorium demonstrate a collection of rear windows which are connected to the tune of a bass guitar. In addition to a main stage performance, the arrangement of smaller platforms transforms Koolhaas's fictitious city into a performance of multiple simultaneous acts. The erosion of the fourth wall occurs when the audience, reflecting on their position in the city, becomes aware also of its own subjectivity. The focus of the editing techniques which have been related to architectural projects thus far has been on preserving the continuity of the narrative as a storytelling device. This type of editing is closely aligned with the classical Hollywood style or montage sequence. As another foray into the editor's laboratory, the montage of Soviet filmmaking of the 1920s is perhaps capable of expanding the repertoire of the architect. One of the first examples of Soviet montage theory is a well-known experiment by Lev Kuleshov. In his experiment, Kuleshov splices together a short reel of film consisting of shots of a bowl of soup, a girl lying in a coffin, and a woman lying on a sofa. Between these shots, he cuts to the exact same footage of the face of a popular actor. The result of this experiment is the audience's reaction, expressing their amazement at the performance of the actor as he reacted to each subsequent scene. Kuleshov has assembled a film which suggests that the interpretation of the film by the audience is dependent not only on the individual content of the frames, but also on their sequence. The notion of the effective role of the editor in this regard is taken further by the work of Kuleshov's well-known student, Sergei Eisenstein. Eisenstein's theory of montage was different than Kuleshov's in that his attempt was to provoke associations in the audience rather than study associations through ambiguity. An interesting result of Eisenstein's theory, which encapsulates 5 different types of montage, is a kind of phenomenal layering of multiple scenes. He describes this as a mode of perception in which sequential events are perceived simultaneously in addition to chronologically. This process of perception assembles a jumble of individual thoughts into a discernible experience. In contrast to the concurrent multi-narrative which has been discussed with respect to McCormick's Center, I would liken the experience of Eisenstein's montage to the psychological fragmentation present at Sana's Toledo Glass Pavilion. The glass pavilion consists of a set of individuated frames and plan floating in a transparent pochette. Unlike at McCormick's Center, the frames are articulated through walls which isolate and compartmentalize events, but create a different collective awareness. While the viewers at IIT are busy rushing around amidst a collection of static scenes, the visitors to the glass pavilion are isolated within their environments. This isolation makes them aware primarily of the situation occurring in the immediate vicinity, while being only peripherally aware of the panorama which exists in fragments beyond the myopia of the glass walls. The fragmentary nature of the scenes beyond the walls is intensified both by the layering of transparencies as well as the reflection of the glass within a homogeneous material palette. The reflection encourages introspection while the transparency denies a hidden vantage point to the observer. Combined with the neutralizing materiality, the voyeuristic atmosphere which is deliriously proliferated at McCormick's Center is discouraged. As an expansion upon the extent to which the fragmentary awareness present at the glass pavilion is influenced by its material palette, I offer the example of Sana's Rolex Learning Center. As another variation within the morphology of Sana's Miesian box, the Rolex Learning Center is more exuberant as an object than as an envelope. With a similar neutral palette to the glass pavilion and a circulatory system which could be compared to McCormick's Center, the blurry people at Rolex appear to be zipping about a big box of curiosities without cabinets. Somehow, the sterile palette and empty volume of the center add up to an energetic scene without character. The vast, unimpeded landscape, for all of its eccentric waves of concrete, is missing an editor. With a dose of photojournalism, it can leave the realm of architecture to become an indoor skiing facility, complete with beanbag, stair, and handrail-shaped obstacles. The role of montage as it pertains to the perception of experience is especially captivating. It reveals that the documentary status with which film is sometimes regarded is an impossibility given the hand of the editor and the mind of the viewer. While the camera records without discretion, the editor is responsible for communicating the message to an observer capable of assembling experience in a complex, non-linear way. Editing is often thought of as a post-production process which turns the raw footage into the final intended narrative. But in order to fully engage with the editor's palette, it would be advantageous to treat editing as an autonomous discipline capable of production from the raw materials of film. Christian Marclay's The Clock, a film which was recently on display at the Wexner Center, is an instance of this type of pure autonomous editing. Marclay splices together disparate scenes from the pre-existing condition of cinema, which reveal interesting connections between the environment and the clock. His 24-hour chronicle is an experiment which uses film as a medium to produce a pure editor's art. Another contemporary artist situated within the discipline of editing is German filmmaker Clemens von Wedemeyer. Von Wedemeyer doesn't trust film. His work underscores the misconception of film as a reliable record of event. His galleries showcase the hand of the editor as a manipulative force in the illusion of the narrative on film. Often using one set of footage, von Wedemeyer produces both a film as well as a piece which chronicles its construction. He then stages both films in the same gallery. His shows include documentaries assembled from fragmentary footage of dubious origin, as well as galleries in which simultaneous films are screened literally back to back, calling into question the role of the fourth wall in relating the audience to the film. My objective for this lecture is to suggest that architects, in addition to examining design through various lenses, should recut design to produce various additions by appropriation of the editor's laboratory. These additions arise through an experimental process of clipping and joining decorated frames with transitory techniques. One technique which has been explored is a dramatic series in which the frames are aligned and joined with a preparatory interlude. In this edition, the curtains are lowered and subsequently drawn between frames. This is the experience of Lucy's narrative employed in the Downtown Athletic Club's Tower of Lockers and the axial enfilade of the Palazzo Doria. Another technique is the rectangular grid of storage containers in which each disparate environment seals its occupants away from its counterparts. This is the large frame of cubicles in Tati's constructed Plan Voisin and the extroverted shells of Koolhaas's City of the Captive Globe. Then there are the additions of the collective promenade theater, the retrospective tunnel of the West Wing, Cohen's diagram of enfilade in half, which places its subject on a shelf. These are the Guggenheim Museum, the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, and IKEA's Rat Maze. Finally, there are the configurations in which the editor has offered his audience a view through the curtain. In the same way that Hitchcock's Rear Window and Eisenstein's montage subject the film audience, this effect transforms the fourth wall into a two-way mirror and subjects the audience to the stage. By appropriation of editing techniques, the architect can multiply the possible connections between frames to suggest a complex narrative. The scene which exists amongst film transitions are the fragments from which the narrative takes shape. In the same way that not all parts of the narrative are required for the film to be intelligible, it can be stated that not all parts of the situation are required for the environment to exist. In his publication, The Wrong House, Steve Jacobs conducts a series of case studies in which he creates fictional plans by watching Hitchcock movies in an effort to understand the director's attitude towards set architecture. What Jacobs produces is not the actual sets, those belong to Hitchcock's film reels, but the connections which are inferred by the sequence of the frames. Jacobs' contribution to the plan is the missing transitory information. He suspends his introverted scene within a mesh of light gray poché. In his popular book on practice, Stan Allen has written an essay entitled Mies's Theater of Effects, in which he sets Mies in a lineage with Schinkel's panorama of Palermo. Stan highlights the way in which Mies produces disconnection between the subject and the city in his Berlin National Gallery via a panoramic view from within the Miesian box. We can find within this analysis a certain editorial sensibility in Mies's work. The way in which the carefully assembled frames isolate and package a collection of moments. The role of the editor is to construct the record of events, of experience, to assemble a storyboard which encapsulates the essence of the narrative. Upon completion, the actors stare into a mirror which is in fact an image produced by the editor and not a perfect reflection. Memory is the construct of the editor. Thank you.
Really, again, at the risk of banality, really fascinating talk. I mean, it always impresses me, these things are such coherent, discursive universes. Like, it's hard to imagine like a question of clarification because they're super clear. I guess the only things that I'm sort of curious about in all these talks are the decisions of rhetoric, like how you decide to stage the argument. So I'm curious, because it's clearly an investment in editing, its techniques, and I think it was very perceptive about how those techniques played out. And I think it concluded with some propositions for architecture, which were similarly clear. I'm curious about like the enfilade. What was the title of your talk again?
Right, it was called Enfilade, so it was kind of playing on the odd arrangements.
Yeah. But I mean, enfilade is an architectural term, and you sort of allude to it, but I'm just curious why foreground the notion of enfilade, which would, I don't know, touch on a lot of this material, but would develop another topic in a way, as opposed to like versions of editing. Because the one thing that sort of comes out in that curiosity is how much, I don't know, like the historical coincidence of the emergence of editing technique in film and how it's related to or not related to architectural movements at that moment. And so, for example, we've already heard a talk today about the architectural promenade and the way it strung together these various elements. And we know, the correlations between Korb and Eisenstein. But like in your depiction of it, you almost see it, I mean, my understanding of it is that it is, in the promenade, not even a form of editing, almost about more a continuity. And so what I'm missing is what happens between Sohn and Rem, two motions where the notion of enfilade could be arguably present, and maybe architectural intentions that did not have a conception of the envelope? Because I don't think it's always such a prescient topic within the development of the field. It seems to come back at a certain moment with the work of Rem and others, in this notion of like disarticulating and then reconnecting that disarticulation, which I think is what editing does. And so the two discourses, which I really appreciate, the bringing together the architectural and the editorial, but I'm just wondering if we've left out too much of the architectural development to have those correlations be understood sort of historically and how they might overlap or go apart. Like, you gave the example of Stan and his reading of the Mies project as like one kind of like pictorial disassociation, but like how would you think about this notion, like would the concept that you've given of editorial enfilade apply to the work of Mies, or would it fall outside of it?
I mean, I think the way that I sort of think about the editorial enfilade has more to do with isolating the parts. Like there's the frames, there's whatever connects them, and in a lot of cases here there was like the larger frame that connects everything. So, I mean, I guess that seems to be applicable to most things. I mean, it's kind of a wide...
I mean, I guess it's for me, I mean, this is an appreciation of your work. It's most interesting when it doesn't apply to everything.
Right.
So when it's a specific kind of attitude about disparate materials, the fact that like Mies might fall outside of it, to me, it makes it more interesting as opposed to less. But then it just sets up, and it might not be your interest of your presentation, but it would seem interesting for architecture. Why does disparate a topic at certain points as opposed to continuities?
Right.
And why does overcoming the notion of the disparate become operative at certain junctures?
Okay.
And that's more just curiosity risen by your work, because it's utterly convincing, and I think the close attention to the editorial techniques and finding their analogies within the works of Rem and others, I think is spot on. But I'm now more just curious about the topic itself. Why disparate? And why figuring out these mechanisms of reconnecting the disparate, like in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with just, I mean, the way we experience the world now is so disconnected, and how do we connect those things together? Like 1 minute something's in my face, the next minute something else is, and in a way, it's the editorial techniques and the experience, the way that they relate, is kind of the thing that fascinates me. Just the way, I mean, it's a physical thing that you experience, and even though, you know, the internet and the glass pavilion aren't the same thing, when I'm in the glass pavilion, it kind of still feels like a little bit of that like background consciousness, foreground consciousness, that kind of thing going on. So, I mean, that's what kind of fascinates me.
Good. Thanks.
Yep.
That's all.